I didn't even get the chance to knock before my son opened the door, his face cold as ice. "You're not invited this year," Dad, Ethan said, and slammed the door shut. I just stood there, in the Christmas snow, still holding the gift for my granddaughter, the one my wife wrapped, the last Christmas before she passed. Through the window I saw an old friend, the one who betrayed me, sitting in my chair. You wouldn't believe what happened after that night. But before I go on, hit subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. I'll tell you the whole truth. I stood still for a few seconds in front of that closed door, listening to the sound of the lock clicking shut like a cold knife sliding into my chest. The wind picked up. Snowflakes fell on my coat, melting into thin trails of icy water. Inside, laughter echoed, the soft clinking of glasses under the same Christmas tune I used to love. I was the one who started those parties every year. Now that same melody was playing me out. I set the gift down on the porch step, thought about knocking again. But then Ethan's face came back to me, that hard, final look, the kind that left no room for a father. I don't know what turned my son into that man. Part of me wanted to believe he was just angry, but a 60-year-old man's pride doesn't let him beg. So I turned away, stepped off the snowy porch, quiet like a stranger who'd come to the wrong house. My car was parked a few doors down. When I opened the door, the cold rushed in. But the real chill wasn't from the wind. It was inside me. I let the radio play softly. Silent Night came on, and I could barely hear half the words. My own son had shut me out of the very house I helped him buy. My name is Richard Hale, 60 years old. I used to be the chief financial officer at a big construction firm in Manhattan. Half my life spent with numbers, balance sheets, and responsibilities. After I retired, I sold my shares, bought a small apartment in Brooklyn. I thought the rest of my time would belong to family, to Ethan, his wife Melissa, and my granddaughter, little Lily, the girl with her mother's smile. My wife Margaret passed away 3 years ago from cancer. Since then, Christmas hasn't felt whole. She was the heart of every gathering, her laughter, her gingerbread, her warmth filling every corner of the house. Before she died, she held my hand and said, "No matter what happens, Richard, keep the family together." I promised her, but tonight that promise was fading, like white smoke in the winter air. I started the engine, but didn't drive. In the rearview mirror, Ethan's house glowed warm and golden, that same light that used to belong to me. And inside was Frank, an old friend. He sat in my chair, the one where I used to read to Lily last Christmas. Frank, the man I once trusted like a brother. We started our business together. He's also the one who nearly destroyed my career when I uncovered his fraud. I forgave him once. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. Part of me wondered, did Ethan even know what Frank had done? Or worse, did he know and still choose his side? I drove slowly out of the neighborhood, past rows of houses glowing with Christmas lights. Inside, each one families gathered, their laughter flickering through the windows. I remembered when Ethan was 8 the first time we bought a Christmas tree together. He ran around shouting when he saw the blinking lights. "Christmas is magic, right, Dad?" I used to believe that. Now, that magic belongs to someone else. I stopped by the small park near the Hudson, the one Margaret and I used to walk through every Christmas Eve. I pulled out my phone, hesitated, then typed Ethan's number, but I erased it. I couldn't call him while my heart was still burning with anger. Scrolling through my contacts, I saw the name Mary Chen, my former mentee, now a financial reporter at the Ledger. Logic told me to stay out of anything work-related, but something inside whispered that tonight was about more than just a closed door. I remembered a few months ago helping Ethan review his loan files. Some numbers didn't match strange investments, international transactions he avoided explaining. When I asked, he just smiled and said, "Dad, your time's past. Things work differently now." I let it go, thinking maybe I was too old to understand the new world of finance. But tonight, seeing Frank in that house, the look in his eyes, I knew something wasn't right. I sat there for a long time, staring at the river. The wind whistled through the door seals, twisting the radio signal, until all that remained was the end of the song, "Sleep in Heavenly Peace." A cruel irony piece for everyone, except me. I reached for the gift now dusted with snow. Inside was a small box Margaret had packed for Lily, a postcard that read, "Love is the only wealth that grows when you give it away." I smiled, a bitter smile. Maybe I'd given too much, and been paid back with silence, but something in Frank's eyes tonight wouldn't leave me alone, that smug, knowing look, like he was sure I'd never come back. I took a deep breath, turned the key. The engine growled to life. Maybe it was time to look back at those old numbers, the files I once thought were buried in the past. Because if my instincts are right, this Christmas night is only the beginning. I got back to my little Brooklyn apartment just before midnight. The city was still bright. Christmas lights flashed against the windows, like tiny fires laughing at me. I hung my coat, sat down in the old armchair Margaret used to love. On the table, my cocoa sat half full. I'd made it before I left, thinking I'd share it with Lily after we opened the present. Now it was cold, like everything else. I opened my laptop, not to work out of habit. Decades in finance don't let you stop checking numbers. Part of me just wanted a reason for Ethan's behavior tonight. Maybe he's struggling. Maybe Frank pushed him. Maybe I'd missed something. I pulled up the old archive folder, the project files I kept from when I worked with Ethan. In the blue glare of the screen, rows of numbers marched by. Precise. Cold. I scanned familiar files until one name stopped me. Northfield Development 2023. Ethan had bragged about that project months ago, called it his first real success after going out on his own. I opened the file. My heart dropped. In the shareholder list was a name I'd never seen: LM Foundation Cayman Lodad. I know what Cayman usually means. Anonymous accounts, money sent to vanish. And the person who approved this transaction was Ethan Hale. I closed my eyes, breathed in. Maybe it was a clerical error, maybe a partner fund. But years in finance taught me one rule: money that can't be traced is rarely innocent. I called Tom, an old colleague at the accounting firm still handling Ethan's projects. He picked up after a few rings. "Richard, long time. Midnight call, everything okay?" he asked. "Tom, quick question. Are you still overseeing Northfield's audit?" I said. There was paper rustling on the line. "Yeah, I am. But weirdly, they asked to change auditors last month, said they wanted to simplify the process." Frank signed the request. Why I felt the phone in my hand tighten? Nothing. Just checking they're on the right track. I lied. When we hung up, my stomach sank. Changing auditors midstream is a move only someone trying to hide things makes. I opened an old email from Margaret, the one she sent before she died, with a list of accounts we set up for Ethan and Lily. Line 3 froze me: Lily Education Trust managed by Ethan Hale. I logged in with our old password. The security checks asked questions we always answered together. The account finally opened. The balance was a shock, far lower than I remembered, about $120,000 left. Margaret and I had started that fund with over $970,000 money set aside for Lily's education. Nearly $1 million gone. I stared at the transaction history. Dozens of transfers in the last 6 months. Recipients I'd never heard of. Mostly Cayman, Singapore, Luxembourg addresses. Offshore names. I didn't want to believe it. I called Ethan, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted, "Son, I need to talk. It's about Lily's fund." No answer. I leaned back and looked at the family photo on the wall. Ethan at 10, Margaret between us. I'd promised to give Ethan a better life than I had. Now he was using what I left to burn everything down. Part of me wanted to storm his house, force him to tell the truth. But I knew that would only slam a door like tonight. I needed proof, not fury. I opened my old finance software and began tracing the transactions Ethan had mentioned. Around 3 a.m., a line made the hairs on my arms stand up a contract signed by Franklin Porter Frank with a tiny note in the appendix, authorized by E. Hale. I laughed. I don't know if it was from anger or pain. The pieces slid together. Frank, the man I fired years ago for fraud, was back through my son. Ethan, maybe out of pride, desperate to step out from under me, had become Frank's pawn. Outside, the snow fell harder. Christmas night had passed, but my night felt unfinished. I pulled the curtain aside and watched the empty street. A lone figure walked by, wrapped in a long coat, carrying a red gift bag. Under the street lamp for a moment, I thought I saw Margaret smile. Her voice seemed to echo from somewhere. Sometimes the truth needs to be brought to light, even when it costs us everything. I knew I had no other choice. If Ethan was truly involved in this, I had to act. Not just for him. For Lily Innocent carrying the Hale name. I closed the laptop, folded the paper with the account numbers. Deep down I felt this night was only the beginning of a fight I never wanted. Then my phone rang in the quiet of the night. The caller ID flashed one name, Frank Porter, and I realized the worst was still to come. I stared at the phone screen. Frank Porter blinked in the dark like an old wound being picked open. For a moment I hesitated. Then, like someone who's faced crises for decades, I pressed answer. Richard Longtime, his voice slid through smooth, familiar, and cold. "I guess you weren't thrilled to see me at Ethan's tonight?" he said with that mocking edge. I kept my voice steady. "What were you doing there, Frank?" "Helping your son. We've got a beautiful deal. He calls me his new mentor. Seems he doesn't need his old man's advice anymore." He knew exactly how to hit me. He laughed softly, then added, "Don't worry, Richard. Ethan's grown, smart, ambitious, just like you used to be." Then he hung up, leaving the silence to press in. I sat there a long time. The room was dark, except for the desk lamp reflecting my tired face in the window. "Just like you used to be." That line kept echoing. He wasn't wrong. I'd been the sort of man who'd trade anything to climb higher. I once thought success could fix every mistake. Maybe Ethan inherited my worst trait, not my better ones. I decided to act. I needed proof, not suspicions. I logged into an old company backup, the system Ethan used before he left. My name was still on the advisory list, so I had access. The system was dated its security thin. It didn't take long. An hour later, I found a folder called Private Transfers. The files were encrypted, but I remembered the cipher, the one I taught Ethan when he was in high school. I typed the password Margaret Weinteen 89. A list appeared. Dozens of transfers. Money being blended from various projects into a charity fund called Hale Housing for Hope. I opened the details and felt my chest clamp shut. Final beneficiary, Lily Hale. Amount routed to my granddaughter's name, over $2.5 million. It was a classic laundering scheme: hide transfers under a child's name or a scholarship fund, then move the funds offshore to clean accounts. Ethan and Frank were using Lily as a front to siphon money. I felt as if someone had shoved me off the cliffs of memory. Everything Margaret had built, everything she believed in being used. I rested my head against the chair. My eyes blurred. Margaret's voice rose in my mind. "If our son ever loses his way, what will you do?" Back then, I said, "I'll bring him home." Now, to save him, I might have to expose him. I printed the files, stuffed them into a folder. At dawn, I drove to Mary Chen's office. Mary, my former student from finance and ethics. She opened the door, surprised to see me, worn and pale. "Professor, aren't you taking Christmas off?" she said. "There's something you need to see," I replied. I set the folder on her desk. She flipped through pages, then looked up. "My God, this is large-scale money laundering, Richard." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. And the approver on the list is my son." The room went quiet. Wind hissed at the window like a warning. Mary looked at me with pity and respect. "If I publish this, it'll destroy your family's name and his career." "I know," I said, "but if I stay silent, he'll destroy Lily's future." She nodded slowly. "I'll forward the documents to the Securities Commission. But be ready. Once this is out, there's no going back." I left her office into a city that seemed to move on without me. I drove toward the Brooklyn Bridge, the place Margaret and I used to watch fireworks. Cars crawled, red lights flickering like wounds. I stopped on the bridge, opened the door, and let the cold hit my face. From the skyline, the city glittered as if celebrating. I scrolled my unanswered messages from Ethan. I wanted to call him, tell him I didn't hate him, tell him I only wanted to save him. But I knew when the truth came out, apologies wouldn't be enough. I opened the glove compartment and took out the small box, the gift for Lily. Margaret's card was inside, her ink faded with time. If love means protecting, sometimes it means standing against. I breathed deep and looked up at the gray sky. For the first time, I truly understood responsibility. Not protecting a name, but speaking up to protect what's right, even if it costs everything. I started the car and drove home. This Christmas had no carols, no wine. Just me, a father preparing to betray his own blood, to save the soul inside him. And I had no idea that only a few hours later Ethan would come to me not to argue, but to beg for something I never thought I'd hear him ask. The next morning, I was woken by a pounding on the door. Winter light spilled through the curtains, pale and cold across the floor. I stepped out, and there he was, Ethan. His face was pale eyes red from a sleepless night. I knew then he'd read the news. The report Mary and I sent last night had reached the Securities Commission. Dad, what did you do? His voice trembled, not with fear but anger, the kind that shakes your bones. You've had Frank arrested. The company's collapsing. Do you realize you just destroyed my life? I didn't answer right away. I poured myself some coffee, my hands steady. Son, I said quietly, if your life was built on lies, then you're the one who destroyed it, not me. Ethan let out a sharp laugh, bitter and broken. You always think you're right, don't you? But the world doesn't work your way anymore. Everyone does it. You're just too stubborn to admit it. I set the cup down. Do you remember what your mother said before she passed? He went silent. She told me if our son ever loses his way, help him come back, even if he hates you for it. That's what I'm doing today, Ethan. He stared at me for a long time, then said softly, almost smiling, Mom told me something too. She said, if Dad ever does something wrong, have the courage to stand against him. The words hit me like a weight. Frank had filled his head with a different version of me, the outdated, controlling father holding his son back. Ethan stepped closer, voice low. Do you know why I trusted Frank? Because at least he listened. He gave me a chance, something you never did. I tried everything to earn your respect, Dad, but you only ever saw me as your failed reflection. I wanted to argue, but deep down, he wasn't wrong. I'd been too hard on him, mistaking discipline for love. Maybe all I'd done was build a wall that kept him out. I took a slow breath. Maybe I did fail you, Ethan, but what you're doing now will destroy Lily. You used her name in those offshore accounts. Do you even realize that his face twitched, shock flashing across it? What? I saw it. Transfers under Lily's name, Cayman accounts. Frank used her as cover, and you signed it all. He stepped back like the truth had punched the air out of him. I saw something break in his eyes, a crack between belief and reality. No. Frank said it was temporary, just a way to avoid taxes. I didn't know he used Lily's name. I met his gaze. Now you do. Silence filled the room. Outside, the snow was falling thick and slow. We stood there not as father and son, but as two men bound by the same flawed pride. Finally, Ethan sat down, his head in his hands. If they investigate, I'll lose everything. Melissa will leave me. Lily, she'll hate me forever. Maybe, I said quietly, but at least she'll grow up in truth. Not lies like we did. A tear fell onto his hand. I hadn't seen him cry since he was 12. Maybe this was the moment he finally understood what growing up costs. After a long silence, he whispered, Dad, what can I do now? Cooperate, I said. Tell them everything. Save what's left. If you run, you'll lose your soul and your daughter. He nodded slowly, stood and said, "I need time." "You don't have much," I replied. When the door closed behind him, it felt like something in my chest closed too. I looked out the window. Snow blanketed the streets, erasing everything in white. Under the gray sky, New York looked unnervingly still, as if it was holding its breath. My phone buzzed. A message from Mary, the commission, arrested Frank this morning. The press will pick it up soon. Stay off the radar for a few days. I set the phone down and exhaled. I didn't feel relief or sorrow, just emptiness. Then came another knock. 3 soft, hesitant taps. Not Ethan's. I opened the door. Melissa stood there. My daughter-in-law, her face, pale eyes swollen from crying. "Dad, we need to talk," she said quietly. "It's about Lily." I froze. My chest tightened. Something in her eyes, fear and determination, told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stepped aside and let her in. The air in the room thickened, the scent of cold air mixing with stale coffee, as if even the walls knew. Something darker was waiting to be told. "Dad," Melissa said softly, her voice trembling. "I know Ethan came here this morning, but there's something he didn't tell you. It's about Lily." I froze. "How's she? She doesn't know, right?" Melissa shook her head. "Not yet. But last night when the police came to the house, they said they had to freeze all related accounts. Ethan panicked, packed his things, and left. Lily saw everything. Later she asked me, 'Mom, is Daddy going to jail?' Her voice broke. I didn't know what to say. I sat down, gripping the edge of the chair. In my mind, I saw Lily, bright eyes, messy blonde hair, her smile when I taught her how to fold paper stars. I never imagined the day her name would show up in a money laundering report. Melissa looked at me, then spoke softly. "Dad, I'm not defending Ethan. I know what he did was wrong. But I also know he only got pulled into it because he was desperate to prove himself to you." Her words sank deep. She paused, then reached into her bag and handed me an envelope. "Ethan told me to give you this, if things went bad." I opened it. Inside was a hastily written letter, his handwriting shaky, uneven. "Dad, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I didn't do all this for money. Frank told me if the project succeeded, I'd finally be seen, that I could be someone like you. But I didn't know he used Lily's name. By the time I found out, it was too late." I stopped reading. My eyes blurred. At the bottom, one final line, "I'll come see you after I talk to the police. If I don't make it, tell Lily I always loved her." The letter slipped from my hand and fell to the floor. In that moment, I realized to the very end Ethan was still that little boy, just wanting his father to be proud. The same boy who once ran to me at 10 years old, holding his first drawing, waiting for a word of praise that never came. I looked up. "Do you know where he is now?" Melissa shook her head. "The police are looking. They said if Ethan turns himself in, it'll go easier on him." I nodded, thanked her quietly. That whole afternoon I sat by the window watching people rush through the streets below. One question looping in my head: was doing the right thing worth it, if it meant losing my son? As evening fell, my phone rang. A number I didn't know. I answered. "Dad, it's me." I held my breath. "I'm at the police station." I told them everything. "I'm sorry, Dad." I closed my eyes. Tears came before I could stop them. "Thank you, Ethan. You did the right thing. Maybe too late, but you're still my son." 2 days later, the news broke everywhere. Frank was sentenced. Ethan released on bail, full cooperation pending investigation. While the city buzzed with gossip, I quietly left New York. I moved to Vermont, to the hill Margaret once said she'd retire with me on. A year passed. Winter returned. I now teach at a small local college a class called Finance and Ethics. Every session I begin with the same words. Sometimes honesty doesn't make you more loved. but it makes you worthy of love. That Christmas, I was home alone. Snow covered the porch. I brewed tea, opened a book, and heard a gentle knock on the door. When I opened it, Lily stood there holding a small red-wrapped box. Melissa smiled faintly behind her. "Mom said this is for you, Grandpa," Lily said. My hands trembled as I took it. Inside was an old photograph, Margaret, Ethan, and me one Christmas long ago. In the corner, written in crayon, "Merry Christmas, Grandpa. Daddy said you saved us." I sat down, smiling through tears. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and endless. No carols, no bells, just the slow, steady rhythm of my heart. And maybe, after all the loss, all the years, this was the first Christmas I was truly invited to, not by blood, but by forgiveness. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If you believe that honest stories are still worth listening to, please subscribe to the channel and share this video so I can tell you more true stories about love, betrayal, and the moments when people learn how to begin again.